You found yourself here, where the nights never sleep, where concrete walls remember what you've forgotten, where silent elevators hold their breath at 3:13 a.m. This is Ghosts of Asia, a place where ancient rituals and modern loneliness collide, where spirits don't knock, they wait. Every story here is stitched from whispers, torn from temples, alleyways, lost floors, and quiet grief. We don't chase horror, we remember it. So turn off the lights, press play, and listen closely. Because in Asia, even silence has a name.
They told me no one lived above. That was part of the appeal. I didn't want neighbors stomping on my ceiling. I didn't want children running. I didn't want laughter seeping down through the drywall. I didn't want reminders of life, not after what I had lost. So when the building manager assured me, twice in fact, that apartment 6F was the topmost unit in the building, I nodded without asking more. I signed the lease the next morning, a 6-month rental, month to month after that. No pets, no parties, cash deposit, all fine. I didn't plan to stay long anyway. The building sat near the edge of an older district in the city, a forgotten block. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for somewhere to disappear. It was 6 stories tall, no elevator, no doorman, just an aging stairwell wrapped in rust and peeling paint. The kind of place people passed with quick steps and lowered eyes. But I liked it. There was something peaceful about its stillness, like it had long ago decided it no longer cared whether anyone liked it or not. I moved in on a Tuesday. The hallway outside 6F smelled faintly of rainwater and wood rot. There was an unlit exit sign above a sealed door that looked like it hadn't opened in years. Someone had tried to tape over the cracks, but they'd long since split again. Inside the apartment, things were better. A small studio layout with a single long window facing west, a kitchenette, and a low ceiling that dipped just slightly at the edges. The walls were a faded ivory, stained yellow near the floor, but the air felt dry, not moldy like some others I had seen. And most importantly, silence. The building was nearly empty. I rarely saw anyone in the stairwell. I liked that too. I unpacked slowly, a suitcase, a box of books, an old mattress I pushed against the wall, a photo of my sister that I placed beside the bed, her smile caught in some forgotten moment, back when things still felt soft and unbroken. The first 2 nights passed without incident. Then came the third. That night, I couldn't sleep. Insomnia had shattered me since the funeral. It wasn't the racing thoughts. It was the hollowness, like falling into yourself. I had learned to live inside it. But at 3:13 a.m., something changed. I was staring at the ceiling, not thinking, just existing. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, walking directly above me. Not the sudden thump of something falling, not a creak or the groan of the building settling. No, these were footsteps, a slow, steady pattern. 4 paces, a pause, 3 more, a drag, then silence. I lay completely still. I even held my breath. The sound had come from above, directly above, but that wasn't possible. I sat up, listened. Nothing. I told myself it was a dream, a waking dream, my brain craving noise, inventing one. I convinced myself so thoroughly I almost forgot about it the next day. But the following night, at the same hour, 3:13 a.m., I heard them again. Footsteps, the same pattern. 4 paces, a pause, 3 more, a drag, and then a soft tap, like a slipper brushing the floor. This time, I turned on the light. I stood beneath the ceiling. It was low enough I could almost reach up if I stretched. I pressed my palm flat against the plaster. Cool, solid, but still, above me, there had been steps. In the morning, I went down to the manager's office. She was a middle-aged woman named Auntie Lien. Everyone called her that, though I never saw anyone else speak to her. Her office was just a folding table beside the laundry machines. "Excuse me," I said. She didn't look up from her radio, a creaky old box that played low static jazz. Only when I cleared my throat did she blink at me. "You live in 6F?" she said before I introduced myself. "Yes, I just had a question." She sighed before I finished. "You hear them?" I paused. "The footsteps?" "You are on the top floor." "Yes, but there is no unit above yours. Just sealed beams, pipes, old ventilation. Rats, maybe. That's all." I didn't say anything. "Sound travels strangely in old buildings. You want me to move you? There is another unit, lower." "No," I said quickly. She shrugged. "Then you'll get used to it. They all do." They? But she had already returned to her radio. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat on the mattress and waited. And at exactly 3:13 a.m., the sound came again. This time slower, more defined, each step seeming to press just above my head. The ceiling didn't creak. It responded, as if something heavy was shifting its weight with purpose. And in that moment, I was struck by a strange thought. Whoever was walking up there wasn't just moving. They were looking for something. And whatever it is, they had not yet found it. Not yet. The fourth night, I slept with the light on. Not because I believed it would stop anything, but because I needed to see the ceiling. I laid on the mattress, head propped on a stack of books, the bulb flickering faintly above the window. The room glowed with a sickly orange hue, like the kind found in stairwells or old train stations at closing time. I didn't blink much, just stared upward, waiting. And then I saw it. The tiniest movement, a shift in the plaster. Not a shadow, not imagination, but a physical change in the surface, right above where my head would have been. The ceiling dipped, just slightly, a tremble in the paint, a hairline crack whispering into existence across the plaster like a vein beneath skin. It hadn't been there the night before. The footsteps came next. 3:13 a.m., right on time. 4 paces, a pause, 3 paces, a drag. But now there was something new, a kind of breath between the steps. Not sound exactly, more like the feeling of sound, like your ears picking up something just below the threshold of hearing, like pressure. My chest tightened. I stood, stepped quietly to the center of the room, and looked up. The crock had widened. Not large, not dangerous, but unmistakably longer. And it curved slightly, as if something had been tracking a path, a map drawn into the ceiling. I snapped the photo, but the crack barely showed. I tried again. No difference. The next morning, I pulled a chair to the center of the room and stood on it, ran my fingers across the ceiling. Dry, dusty, smooth in some places, rough in others, but definitely cracked, like a scar trying to reopen. I knocked. Solid. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing. Just dead silence. That night, I recorded everything. I set my phone on the desk near the mattress and hit record at 3 a.m. I lay down, eyes open, breathing slow, as the silence thickened like fog before the storm. And then once again, at 3:13 a.m., the footsteps came. but not where they should have. This time, they began behind me, in the far corner of the ceiling, and moved diagonally, inching above the space until they reached the crack. They stopped directly above it, and then nothing. I waited. Not a sound. Until something else broke the silence. My phone. It buzzed, then clicked, and went dark. The screen flickered once, and the recording app crashed. I picked it up. The phone was warm, warmer than it should have been. The video file existed, but when I opened it, only the first 13 minutes played. Right before the timestamp hit 3:13, the screen froze. Audio cut, then static. Just silence, followed by a soft, high tone, like a whistle, far, far away. I uploaded the file to my laptop, tried to scrub frame by frame. At minute 13:12, everything looked normal. At 13:13 exactly, the screen jittered, and then for a single frame, something appeared. A blur, a flicker, something too fast to process, but something present. I paused it again and again, inching through the frames. In one, just one, I caught the shape of a footprint, not on the floor, on the ceiling. I zoomed in. It was faint, faded, almost not there. But the heel, the curve of the arch, the slight indentation, it was there. Facing downward, the footprint of someone standing above. I felt my mouth go dry. I looked up, and just then, just for a second, I could swear the crack on the ceiling widened, inch by inch, like a grin pressed into drywall. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found paint chips on the floor, white specks, fine as ash. They hadn't been there before. I swept them up into a glass jar and placed it on the counter. Proof, I told myself. I'd need proof. By now, I had stopped thinking I was imagining it. This wasn't hallucination. This wasn't grief distorting reality. I had lived through that. This was something trying to be heard, something repeating itself. I checked the hallway for answers. I looked for neighbors, someone who might hear what I was hearing. But there were no other units on the 6th floor, just mine. The staircase ended here. The emergency exit door next to my unit had no handle, just faded paint and a sealed seam where a knob used to be. I knocked on it anyway. It echoed back with a dull, solid thud. I placed my ear to the surface and heard nothing, not even a faintest hum, just thick, choking silence, as if the space behind the door had been swallowed whole. That night, I sat in the far corner of the apartment, eyes fixed on the ceiling, phone recording, lights off, just a candle lit in a jar, its flame flickering slightly from my breath. And once more, at exactly 3:13 a.m., the footsteps came, but this time they stopped midway. No pause, no drag, just ceased, like something had frozen mid-step. And then I saw the crack split. Not loudly, not in a dramatic burst. It just split. A sliver of black pushing through white, a thin, uneven line stretching outward like a vein in old wood. And for a moment, the candle flickered so violently I thought it would go out. The flame leaned hard toward the crack, as if pulled by something unseen. I could feel the air shift. Colder, denser, like standing at the bottom of a river. I didn't move. And then, just as quickly, it was over. The flame steadied. The crack stopped spreading. And the ceiling fell silent, but not empty. I no longer believed I was alone.
By the fifth night, I could no longer pretend the footsteps were just sounds. They were patterns, routines, a habit belonging to someone or something that believed it still had a place to be, a place above me, a place that shouldn't exist. I decided to confirm it once and for all. If there was a person above me, I would confront them. If there wasn't, then the only thing left to face was the truth I had tried so hard to avoid. The dead walk quieter than we think. I left my apartment at noon. The hallway outside was dim, lit only by a narrow window overlooking the alley. Dust clung to the glass like a curtain. The stairwell wound downward in a tired spiral, each concrete step sagging slightly from age. I climbed upward instead. There were only 7 steps before the staircase ended abruptly at a low ceiling mottled with stains. A faded sign above the final step read, "Level 6, roof access, sealed." But instead of a ladder or door to a roof, the wall looked wrong, as if something had been removed, erased. The outline of a frame was visible in the paint. A door frame once existed here. Hinges once held weight here. Locks once turned here. But now it was just wall. Wall where a door used to be. Wall where an entire floor should have been. I touched the plaster. It was cold, much colder than the hallway. And there, just at ear level, was a faint line, a seam, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. A sealed hatch. It blended so well you could miss it unless you pressed your face close. My breath fogged the surface. I knocked. The sound that came back wasn't hollow. It was layered, as if something vast and empty lay behind it. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the seam. At first, nothing. Then, softly, something shifted. Not footsteps, not movement, just air. A tiny exhale, like a room long sealed letting out a single breath in response. I stepped back quickly. The hallway behind me seemed suddenly darker, as if the shadows had thickened. I looked down the stairwell. No one. I looked back at the sealed hatch. Still. Silent. But I no longer trusted the silence. I returned downstairs, descending 2 steps at a time until I reached the manager's office beside the laundry machines. The radio was off today. The room felt heavier without the static jazz. "Auntie Len?" I asked. She didn't look up. She was folding towels, hands trembling slightly with age. "There's no roof access above 6F?" I said. Her jaw tightened. "And there's no upper floor, no 7th floor, but the building looks taller from outside?" She slammed the towel onto the table. "Do not measure this building," she said sharply. Her voice had never sounded like that before, not once. "It's 6 floors, 6, always 6. I stared at her. "Then what's sealed above the staircase?" She didn't answer. "Was there a fire, a collapse, a renovation, something?" She froze, her eyes fixed on the table, on nothing. After a long moment, she whispered, "Let old things stay buried." "But I hear footsteps," I said, voice cracking slightly. She didn't move. "Someone is walking up there," I insisted. "Someone who shouldn't be." When she finally spoke, her voice was barely human. "Stop listening." I felt cold. "Why?" She lifted her head at last. Her eyes were glassy, afraid, the kind of fear you don't fake. Because once you hear them, they hear you, too. A chill ran down my spine. I left the office before she said anything more. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and searched for blueprints or floor plans of the building. Anything online, anything archived. Nothing. The building wasn't registered as 6 floors. It wasn't registered as anything at all. City records showed a demolished structure at this address, torn down 29 years ago, never rebuilt. But I was living here. I went further back, old newspaper records, and there it was. A headline from 1973. Top floor collapse, kills 7. Investigation continues. I clicked the link. The top floor caved in during a storm. 7 tenants trapped. Bodies recovered. Except one. A woman. Name unidentified. Rumors followed the article. Building haunted. Tenants report footsteps. Manager seals 7th floor. I scrolled. A comment at the bottom of the archived page caught my eye. It was 10 years old. If you live on the top floor, don't look up at 3:13 a.m. It's not the footsteps you should fear. It's when they stop. The room went quiet. I lifted my head. The ceiling above me felt heavier, like a held breath, like something was waiting. And at that moment, I heard a soft, faint sound, not footsteps this time, but a scratch, a single, slow drag across the plaster, as if a nail were tracing the crack. I stepped backward. The scratch stopped. Then came a second scratch, directly above where I stood. Then a third. I stared at the ceiling. The crack had deepened ever so slightly, just enough for me to see darkness inside the line, blackness where there should be white plaster. I whispered to myself, this place shouldn't exist. And in that instant, the footsteps began again. Slow, measured, walking directly above a floor that the world claimed had never existed.
On the 6th night, I didn't wait for the footsteps. I stayed awake not to hear them, but to see what they were trying to show me. There's a moment between 3:12 and 3:14 a.m. that feels outside of time. Too late to be called night, too early to be called morning. That in-between hour when the living rest and the dead remember. I lay flat on the floor, eyes fixed on the ceiling. I didn't blink, didn't move. And at exactly 3:13 a.m., the footsteps came. But this time, I wasn't startled. I was ready. They began in the far corner, just as before. 4 paces, a pause, 3 paces, a soft drag. But then, something new. The ceiling dust began to fall, tiny particles descending slowly through the dim light of my night lamp. And then, the outline appeared. Not just cracks, footprints. Faint, but visible. Light gray smudges forming and fading in real time, as if someone was walking directly above the paint. The steps moved across the ceiling in slow, quiet rhythm, and each print was the same size. Small. Too small for a man, too delicate for boots. I stood up, heart pounding, eyes locked on the ceiling. I took a photo. The image blurred, distorted. I took another, same result. The camera refused to see what I saw. But then, from the corner of my vision, I caught something else. Near the door,
near the threshold where the hallway met my living space. A new footprint. This one wasn't on the ceiling. It was on the floor. Wet, slight, faint as breath on glass. The print of a small slippered foot, like a woman's. And beside it, another. Then another. Each step pointed inward, from the door to the center of the room. No sound accompanied them, no echo, no breath, just presence. I knelt beside one of the prints, reached toward it. The floor was dry, but the print remained cold. Not water, not dust, something colder, denser, as though the air itself had been marked. I followed the trail back toward the front door. It was shut, still bolted. But at the base of the frame, just beneath the crack, something had been pushed through. A white slipper. Old, mildewed, cracked at the toe, faded embroidery on the side, a small lotus bloom. Familiar. Too familiar. I had seen that design before, in an old photo of my sister, one she took at a hotel in the countryside. Her feet curled up on the bed, those very slippers peeking from beneath a cotton robe. But that couldn't be. Those slippers were thrown away after she died, burned with her things. Weren't they? I stared at the slipper for a long time, then picked it up. It was damp, the fabric cold and stiff, as if it had been submerged. And then a sound behind me made me turn. Click. The phone on my desk lit up. A notification. A voice message. No sender. Just a file titled 313. I tapped it open. At first, nothing. Then, the faintest hum, a woman's voice, distant, barely audible, humming a lullaby, one I hadn't heard in years, one my sister used to sing when we were children. I dropped the phone. The screen went black. I backed away until I hit the mattress, my breath shallow, my skin cold. I looked back up at the ceiling, and for the first time, I saw her. Not a full form, not a face, just the faintest impression. A figure pressing downward, a shadow between paint and plaster, arms bent, knees tucked beneath her, head turned sideways, as if someone were lying face down above me, staring through the ceiling. I didn't move, couldn't. And in that frozen moment, the air shifted. The smell of rainwater and mildew filled the room. The ceiling exhaled dust, and the shadow vanished. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the edge of the mattress until sunrise, the slipper still in my hand. The next afternoon, I walked to the end of the block. There was an old print shop, a place that sometimes held local records and forgotten paper trails. I asked the owner, a man in his 60s with cataract-clouded eyes, if he remembered anything about my building. He raised an eyebrow. "You live in the old Bellevue flats?" I nodded. "Top floor?" "Yes." He sighed, long and slow. "They used to call it the Widow's Walk." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "There was a woman, long ago, lived alone on the top floor, wore white slippers every day, even in the rain. They said she lost someone, a child maybe, or a lover. No one knew. She never spoke, but every night she walked." I felt my throat tighten. He would walk for hours up and down her floor, always at the same time, just before dawn, never changed her routine. Some said she was waiting, others said she was looking. "What happened to her?" I asked. "She jumped," he said flatly, "from the roof." Silence stretched between us. "But there's no roof access," I whispered. He looked at me then,
as if seeing me fully for the first time. "No," he said softly, "not anymore."
On the seventh night, it rained. Not a summer drizzle, but a persistent cold downpour that felt like it had come from some older century, wetting the skin not just with water, but with memory. The window rattled softly as wind slid between the frames. I sat by it for hours, watching the light from the alley shimmer against puddles that never seemed to settle. The rain fell sideways at times. The sound was steady, but even that was easier to bear than what came after. Because the rain had a voice. It spoke through objects. And that night, it left me a message. At 3:13 a.m., the footsteps returned. But instead of pacing overhead, they stayed still. For the first time, they didn't move. They simply stood right above me, as though someone had come to a stop, waiting, listening, pressing their weight against the ceiling. And then there was a knock, not from the door, but from above. 3 knocks, hollow, slow. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I barely breathed. I stared at the ceiling, my heart thudding like a second heartbeat beneath my skin. The knocks did not repeat, but something else did. The doorbell. It rang once, a long, tired chime that echoed through the room like something remembered. I turned my head slowly toward the door and froze. There, leaning gently against the frame, was an umbrella. Long, curved, frayed at the edges. The fabric was off-white, once clean, but now spotted with age. A few water droplets clung to its ribs, though the floor beneath it was dry. The handle was wooden, carved in a familiar spiral. It took me a moment, but I recognized it. It was hers, my sister's. The very same umbrella she had held during our last family photo. On a bridge, laughing as the rain came down. She had twirled it in her fingers like a dance partner. That umbrella had been with her for years, and after her death, I had given it away, or burned it. I couldn't even remember anymore. Yet here it was, dry, waiting. I knelt before it, not daring to touch. Then the light flickered. A single pulse, then darkness. I reached for my phone, using its flashlight to cast the smallest beam across the entryway. The umbrella was still there, but something else had changed. Beside it, on the floor, lay a folded piece of paper. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The paper was damp, the ink running. Only a few words remained legible. "Come back inside before you're seen. Don't leave it open. L." My sister's initial. I staggered backward. The apartment felt colder. The ceiling pressed lower. The floor rose slightly beneath my feet, as though the room were curling inward. The umbrella hadn't moved, but it no longer felt empty. Something had been attached to it, carried in or summoned. I left it untouched. I turned on every light in the apartment, and still, I saw her. Not fully, but in fragments. Reflected in the glass above the sink, standing in the corner of the window's glare, slippers wet, head tilted, watching. Not angry, not sorrowful, just waiting. The next day, I walked 6 blocks to the old district temple. I didn't know what I expected. Comfort, perhaps, or maybe an explanation. Instead, I found a monk sweeping the stone steps, dressed in faded saffron robes with eyes like wet ash.
He looked up as I approached. "I hear her," I said, without knowing why those were the first words. The monk didn't flinch. "She leaves gifts," I added, "but not for comfort, for memory." He nodded once. "The dead are not generous. They are repeating." Repeating what? Their last mistake, their last emotion, their last thought. He stepped closer. "Grief calls louder than prayers. If yours echoes long enough, they will come." I felt my throat tighten. "She was my sister," I said. The monk's expression didn't change. "Then she will be gentle," he said, "but not forever." I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. That night, I placed the umbrella outside the apartment door. I didn't want it inside anymore. But in the morning, it was back, not leaning by the door to this time, but lying flat, right beneath the crack in the ceiling. And the paint above it was wet, dripping from a single perfect footprint, pressed upside down into the plaster. Small, familiar, a woman's. By the 8th night, I began treating 3:13 a.m. like a ritual. Not by choice, but because whatever was happening had become something sacred. There was a process now, a rhythm. I'd shut off all the lights at 3, place my phone on the desk, start the recording, sit cross-legged on the mattress, face upward, wait. It was no longer about fear. Fear had been spent, replaced by a thin, taut thread of expectation, like I was waiting for someone I already knew, someone I had invited without realizing it. That night, I added something new, a test. I dusted the floor with flour, a fine white layer across the hardwood, around the door, the mattress, the desk, enough to catch prints, enough to see what the eyes couldn't. And then, with a piece of chalk, I drew a circle on the ceiling. A small one, crude, lopsided. It meant nothing. But I wanted to know if she would step inside it. 3:13 a.m. came like a tide, slow, heavy, unavoidable. The room dimmed, even with the lamp on. The shadows felt thick, more solid than the air. And then came the familiar sound. 4 paces, pause. 3 paces, drag. But this time, they stopped early, right at the edge of the chalk circle, directly above. I stared at the ceiling, waited. Nothing moved, but something watched. Then, so soft it might have been imagined, I heard it. Breathing, just above the plaster. Shallow, unsteady, the way a person might breathe when lying flat on their stomach, nose almost touching the floor. I held my breath. The sound continued. Then, without warning, my phone glitched. The screen flickered, the audio recording stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was occupied. A sound pulsed through the ceiling. A whisper. No words, just vibration, like a voice coming through water. And then something else. The hum. It returned. The same lullaby tune, the same one from the message before. But now, closer. No longer a file, no longer inside my phone. It was in the room. A voice, female, humming low, just outside the circle of flour. I turned my head slowly. There, by the door, stood a shadow. Not cast by anything, not caused by light. It simply existed, like fog where there should be none. And that it moved, glided, not toward me, but toward the desk.
The flower shifted as it passed. 2 slippered feet pressed lightly into the white powder. No sound, only proof. I didn't move. I couldn't. And when I looked up again, the ceiling responded. The chalk circle had broken. A new crack split through it, jagged and fresh, like the plaster had been scored from inside. And then I heard it. A voice whispered from behind the ceiling. Not a scream, not a cry, just 2 words. Look down. I did. There, beneath me, was a 3rd set of footprints. Inside the circle of flower. Small, bare, facing me. Morning light did not come with warmth. It came like a warning, unwelcome and gray. I stepped carefully across the room, checking each footprint, one by one. The flower had not blown. The prints were perfect, defined. 3 sets. 2 led in from the door. 1 had appeared inside the circle. I hadn't moved. Nothing else had entered. So either something formed those prints inside the circle, or it had already been there, waiting. Later that day, I took the flower prints to the local shrine. I had photos, blurry but clear enough to see the shape, the size, the direction. I showed them to an old caretaker, a woman hunched by age, but still sharp in the eyes. She stared at the image for a long time. Then she looked up at me and asked, "Do you dream of stairs?" I didn't know what to say. Stairs that lead upward, but never end. Yes, I whispered. She nodded once. "They are not stairs," she said. I waited. "They are invitations." To where? The caretaker reached for a slip of paper. She wrote something in tight, careful strokes, then folded it. "A seal," she said, handing it to me. "Place it on your ceiling, above the crack. It won't stop her, but it may make her pause." I took it. The paper felt warm, like it had just been touched by someone who wasn't there. That night, I did as she said. I taped the paper above my bed, directly over the newest crack. Then I sat back, waited for the hour. The air shifted at 3:13. The breathing returned, then the humming. But this time, it wavered. The steps never crossed the seal. They stopped short, circled, prowled. And then, so soft it might have been imagined, I heard her whisper, "That won't help you." Then silence. The hum ceased. The room grew still, and above me, the ceiling let out one soft exhale, as though something had held its breath too long. The seal did not last. It held for 3 nights. 3 quiet, breathless nights where the footsteps circled but never entered. But on the 4th, the humming returned, stronger, closer, louder than before. And when I awoke at dawn, the seal was gone. Not torn, not burned. Gone. The tape still clung to the ceiling, but the paper had vanished, as though it had been plucked delicately from reality. In its place was a new crack. It curved, not like a break, more like handwriting. And beneath it, just faintly, scratched into the plaster, the shape of a door. A rectangular outline, no more than 2 feet wide. Too small for a person, too perfectly drawn to be natural. I stared at it for a long time, and I knew. Someone had been trying to come through, not to visit, but to return. That morning, I began peeling back the apartment, searching for what had been buried. Behind the old fuse box near the door, I found a wall cavity sealed with crumbling wood and rusted nails. It looked like it had been patched decades ago. I pried it open. Inside were papers, files, yellowed, warped by moisture, forgotten. Tenant records, a full box of them. Many names, many faces, all from one floor. Floor 7, which shouldn't have existed. Each file had a photo, passport style, a young couple, an old man, a student, a child. 7 names total, 7 residents, all listed under Unit 7A to 7D. No mention of their deaths, no mention of collapse, just abrupt closures, moved out, scribbled in red across every file. Every file except one. It had no name, no photo, only a blank form. But at the bottom, in a darker ink, someone had scrawled, "She wouldn't leave." No date, no signature, just that sentence. Beneath it, another line, shakier. She kept walking, even after. I held the file like it might disintegrate. I knew who they meant. The woman in white slippers, the one who paced the ceiling at 3:13 a.m. She had lived in this building, not as a ghost, but as a tenant. She had belonged here once, and she had been erased. I brought the box to Auntie Lien, the building manager. She didn't even blink when I placed it on her table. I said, "You knew." Her hand stayed folded. I whispered, "You sealed it away, all of it." She nodded. "She wouldn't leave," she said. "She still hasn't." I waited. She lost a child, or a husband, or both. No one really remembers anymore. But she stayed after the collapse. They tried to move her, tried to build over, tried to forget. She looked at me then. She stayed. I felt cold. I said, "She's not haunting the building." Auntie Lien shook her head. "No," she said. "She is the building." That night, I could not sleep. Not from fear, but from understanding. Everything made sense now. The precise footsteps, the repetition, the humming. She wasn't trying to scare me. She wasn't even trying to be seen. She was doing what she had always done, walking, pacing, searching the corridors of a floor that no longer existed. I sat beneath the crack in the ceiling, staring upward, whispering to myself, "She doesn't know she's dead." The moment I said it out loud, the ceiling groaned. A soft sound, a shifting of weight. Then, very faintly, 3 knocks. Not angry, not desperate, just lost. I decided to help her. I laid out the tenant files on the floor. 7 names, 7 stories. I circled each one in chalk, lit candles around them, then whispered their names aloud, one by one. And when I reached the blank file, the one with no name, I said, "You can come down now." The air shifted. The ceiling above me creaked, once, then twice, and then footsteps, but not walking, descending, like someone climbing down invisible stairs. The floor chilled, the lights dimmed, and then from the wall beside the window, I heard something slide, a groan of old wood. I turned slowly. A thin panel had opened, one I'd never seen before. Inside was a ladder, metal, rusted, leading up, not into the roof, but into darkness. And there, just above the hatch, was light, flickering, like candlelight, from another room, another world, another floor. I didn't climb it, not that night. I simply closed the panel, pressed my back against the wall, and whispered, "I see you." And in return, from the ceiling, came the softest whisper, "Thank you."
The hatch remained closed for 2 days. I didn't touch it. I didn't climb, but I knew it was waiting. And so did she. The footsteps changed. No longer pacing, no longer circling. They hovered. Each night at 3:13 a.m., she stood still, just above the ladder's hidden frame, as though deciding whether to descend or waiting for me to rise. And during the day, something else began. The mail slot, long rusted shut, began clicking open. At first I thought it was the wind, but on the third morning, I found the first letter, folded, yellowed, damp around the edges. No stamp, no name, just a single sheet of paper, written in delicate handwriting that wavered like the tip of a burning candle. It read, "I miss you every day. I waited, but you never came back. Are you still alive down there? Or have you forgotten me too? L." I froze. The signature was not mine, but the initial was my sister's. I told myself it was coincidence, a shared initial, an illusion of grief filling in the gaps. But the next night, another letter came, and this time it was addressed to me. Full name, spelled exactly the way she used to write it. Even the loop in the G was hers. I opened it slowly. "You used to hold my hand in the dark. Do you still remember the beach, the jellyfish we thought were stars? You promised you'd come back. I'm still waiting. L." I collapsed into the chair. The words were hers, private memories no one else knew. Not dreams, not illusions, memories. I searched the apartment for rational answers, for hidden cameras, a prank, an elaborate cruelty. But there was no one else. No footprints in the hallway, no fingerprints on the door. Just letters, every morning, one by one, always delivered at 3:13 a.m., always signed L. I kept them in a drawer. 11 letters, some short, some pages long, but all from her, or something pretending to be her. And the more I read, I noticed a pattern. Each letter referenced something that hadn't happened, places we'd never been, moments we'd never shared. It was her voice, but her life was different, slightly off, as though her memories had diverged, as though she had lived
somewhere else, in another version of our story, where I had stayed, where I had followed her up the stairs. On the 12th night, I lit a candle beside the hatch, placed a photo of us next to it, the only one I had left, her in the rain, holding the umbrella, smiling like she knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. I whispered, "What are you trying to tell me?" The hatch creaked, but did not open. Then, from behind the wall, the sound of paper sliding. I turned. A 13th letter lay on the floor. Heavier, thicker. Inside, multiple pages. But this one was different. Typed, clean, perfectly spaced. When I found your name on the list, after the fire, after everything collapsed, they sealed the floor, but your name was still there. I thought it was a mistake, but now I see. You belong here, just like me. I tried to send you messages in dreams, in reflections, in things you'd recognize, but you didn't answer. You ran. You ran like they all did. Now the ceiling is thinning, and soon it will not matter whether you climb. The door will open, and I will be there. Will you remember me this time? I dropped the letter. My breath caught in my chest. I didn't know what she meant. Did I live here before? Was this just madness, or had something bled through? Some version of me that stayed on the 7th floor. The room felt heavier now. The cracks in the ceiling had spread like veins. Some of them glowed faintly at night, as though light passed from another world through hairline fractures in mine. And always, always, there were the footsteps. Patient, soft, unchanging. She never knocked again. She didn't have to, because I had already opened the door.
There's a moment when the air in a room shifts and you know it's no longer yours. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. The light came in at strange angles. The shadows lingered too long in corners. Even the sound of the tap at night seemed unfamiliar, like it echoed through someone else's kitchen. I kept the letters in a shoebox under the bed. Every morning, I would open it and count. 14, 15, 16. And each new message felt more like a warning disguised as memory. They no longer asked me to remember. They reminded me of things that never happened. Birthdays I never attended, a lake I never swam in, an illness I never had. Yet the handwriting, the phrasing, the little misspellings, they were hers. I stopped reading them aloud, because every time I did, the cracks in the ceiling grew deeper. By the end of the second week, the plaster above my mattress had begun to curl downward like old paper. And behind it, I could see a shape forming, a perfect square, a trap door. But not from above, from below, as though it were never meant to be a ceiling, but a floor. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom, moved to the small couch by the window. Each night at 3:13 a.m., I would sit in silence, watching the outline of the hatch pulse with cold light. The floorboards beneath it would creak, softly, like breathing wood. And then came the smell. Burned wax, old smoke, wet ash. I knew that scent. It came from temples, from shrines, from ritual. I pulled back the rug beneath the bed. There, in the dust, were faint lines, drawn by hand, hidden beneath the woven mat. Symbols, circles,
strokes of red that had faded into brown. I followed them. They led to the kitchen, and then, behind the sink, I found the loose tile. It took me an hour to pry it up, and underneath was something else entirely. Not concrete, not pipework, but soil, pressed flat, cold to the touch. And buried in that soil were scraps of fabric, fragments of bone, crumpled bits of blackened paper with burned writing I couldn't read. A ritual had been performed here, not recently, not just once. It had been done over and over again, layered, sealed, forgotten, or so someone had hoped. I called the temple again, not the shrine woman this time, but a monk I had spoken to once before, the one with the voice like dry river stones. When I told him what I'd found, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "If something is waking up, it means someone is remembering." "I didn't remember anything," I told him. He replied, "Then she remembered for you." I asked him about the symbols, sent him photos. He called me back an hour later. "Those are doorkeeping seals," he said. "To trap a spirit?" "No," he said quietly. "To trap a place." That confused me. He continued, "When a building becomes infected, not with a ghost, but with history, sometimes the only option is to fold it shut, like paper. And what happens if it unfolds?" He didn't answer, so I asked again, "What happens?" This time, he spoke slowly. "Then all the rooms that were forgotten come back." That night, I returned to the hatch. I placed my hand on the square in the ceiling. It was warm, almost fevered. The outline shimmered faintly, and for the first time, I could really see the floor above. It wasn't the 7th floor as it had once been. It was smaller, darker, a corridor with doors that had no handles, all closed, all silent. And from the center of that corridor, a woman stood barefoot, head tilted, slippers in one hand, and in the other, a letter, not yet delivered. She didn't speak. She simply lifted the envelope, pressed it against the invisible ceiling between us, and slowly began to walk, step by step, down the hallway that never was built, as if waiting for me to follow. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I covered the hatch with the rug again, but the heat remained, pulsing faintly through the fabric like a heartbeat trapped in plaster. The monk called me one last time. "Don't open it," he said. "I haven't. Don't want to open it," he added, "because if you start wanting, she'll finish the rest." And yet, I did want. I wanted to know what the corridor smelled like. I wanted to see the wallpaper she touched. I wanted to ask her if she was lonely up there, and whether she still thought of me as someone who abandoned her, or someone who was supposed to stay. I said nothing to the monk, but that night I pulled the rug aside again, and the cracks in the ceiling smiled. Some nights, silence feels heavier than sound. That was how the 10th night began. No footsteps, no humming, no knocks, just silence, dense, unmoving, as if the building were holding its breath. I walked from wall to wall with a candle in hand, its flame barely swaying. The air was still, too still, like something had left or something had entered and didn't want me to notice. I stood beneath the ceiling hatch, staring upward. The square had widened, no longer subtle, no longer imaginary. It was a clear outline now, edges sharp, corners clean, etched into the ceiling above my bed like a door waiting to be opened from the other side. And inside it, pressure. The kind you feel before a storm. The kind you feel inside a closed room after someone stopped crying. I pressed my palm flat against the center. It was warm. Not alive, not burning, but warm. And from behind it, faint as breath behind a veil, came her voice. "Are you ready?" I didn't respond. Not out loud, but something in me had already shifted. Each night she returned, each letter more desperate, each silence more deafening. But this night, she wasn't pacing. She wasn't delivering memories. She wasn't haunting. She was waiting. And waiting is more terrifying than pursuit, because waiting means someone expects you. I set up my camera again, not to capture her, but to capture me, to see what I looked like when the hour struck, because lately I couldn't remember my own face. Mirrors reflected shapes I didn't recognize, eyes I didn't trust, movements that felt too smooth to be mine. I sat cross-legged on the mattress, camera pointed straight at me, ceiling above. I turned off the lights and waited. 3:13 a.m. The camera light blinked once, then froze. And from above, finally, the first sound. Movement. But not walking, not humming. Shifting. As though something above me was adjusting position, turning in place, kneeling, and then a pressing. The ceiling bowed, just slightly, a curve downward as if a weight were resting against it from the other side. And in the silence, a whisper so soft it could have been imagined. "I've made your bed." I stared upward. The plaster flexed. A crack broke open at the corner. And then a single strand of black hair fell through. It drifted slowly downward. I caught it in my hand without thinking. It was cold, damp, human. I dropped it immediately. The camera blinked again and turned off. Morning. I checked the footage. At 3:13, I sat still, unmoving. But behind me, in the footage, above the ceiling, was a shadow. Long, narrow, almost feminine. It leaned downward from above me, and just before the frame glitched, its hand touched my shoulder. I never felt it, not in the moment, but there it was, clear, deliberate, affectionate. The next night, I found the room colder, but the ceiling warmer. She had pressed her presence fully now, no longer content to pace above. Now she watched, all night, never moving, never speaking, just waiting. And each hour I remained awake, the hatch shimmered more visibly, until finally, on the 12th night, it began to open. Not all at once. Just a sliver, just enough to let the heat spill out, just enough to let me hear her breathing. She wasn't tired, she wasn't angry, she was lonely. And I understood her in a way I never had before. She wasn't trying to break through the ceiling, she was waiting for me to rise. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one left to tell. And even if I had, they wouldn't have understood. They'd say it was guilt, grief, but I knew better. This wasn't about mourning the past. This was about entering it, living in the memory she never left,
because she hadn't moved on. She had stayed for decades, watching, writing, walking. And now that someone finally listened, she wasn't letting go. That night, I left my phone off, left the camera unplugged. I lay beneath the ceiling and whispered, "What do you want?" Her voice came so softly I almost mistook it for my own thoughts. "For you to remember me." I closed my eyes, and the hatch creaked. The room filled with warm air. The scent of candle wax and salt water washed over me. And then, from the ceiling, a sound I hadn't heard before. The sound of weeping. Not loud, not desperate, just soft, endless. A grief without voice. A grief too old to scream. She waited above, and I was almost ready to climb.
Grief makes no sound when it first arrives. It simply sits beside you, invisible, like a guest who won't introduce themselves. You begin to adjust your breathing around it, move slower, speak softer, forget where you left your keys, wake up in a room you don't remember falling asleep in. And then, slowly, you become someone else. Someone who leaves the lights on. Someone who listens to footsteps no one else hears. Someone who mistakes memory for invitation. I had become that person. Or maybe I always was. Maybe grief doesn't change you. Maybe it reveals you. By the 13th night, I no longer feared her presence. It was routine now. At 3:13 a.m., the hatch above me would creak open by an inch. The warm breath of her world would seep into mine. A faint, sweet scent, like steamed rice left too long on the altar, would fill the air, and the sound of her pacing would begin. But it wasn't random anymore. She was walking for me. Each step above mirrored my own thoughts. If I sat still, she stood still. If I turned my head, her weight shifted across the ceiling. We were no longer strangers. We were echoes. The letters became fewer. Only 2 that week, both typed, both short. You remember more now? Do you see what I kept? And the second, there are doors inside you too, and I've opened one. I didn't understand the last part until I began dreaming. Not normal dreams, but precise memories I had never lived. A hallway lined with red doors, a bed with lavender sheets, a slipper placed carefully beside a cracked mirror, a small hand touching my shoulder in the dark. And in every dream, her, never speaking, just walking and waiting for me to follow. I called the monk again. His voice was tired. We spoke less this time. I told him about the dreams. He said only one thing. When you grieve deeply enough, even the dead start listening. I asked him if that was dangerous. He paused, then said, only if they listen too long. The apartment had begun to change. It wasn't just the ceiling anymore. The walls breathed. At night, condensation formed on the inside of the window, even when it was dry outside. I would wipe it with my palm and find handprints, not mine, on the other side of the glass. Books I hadn't touched would fall open to pages she used to read. Once I found a cup of tea still steaming on the counter. I hadn't made it, but it was her mug. And in the steam, just briefly, I thought I saw a face. Not terrifying, not ghostly, just lonely. I tried to block the hatch again, taped it, covered it with heavy cloth, nailed a wooden panel across it. The next night, the nails were gone. The panel sat gently against the wall, unharmed. The cloth was folded neatly at the foot of my bed, and on the ceiling, a new sentence had been written into the dust. "You don't have to keep leaving me." That broke something inside me, because she was right. I had always left. In life, in grief, in memory. Even now, I kept my distance, as if looking at sorrow directly would make it permanent. But she had stayed, through time, through erasure, through death. And now she asked me not to leave again. So that night, I stood beneath the hatch, lit a single candle, held the last letter in my hand, and I whispered, "I remember." At first, nothing. Then the sound of footsteps above. One step, another, closer. Then a soft, slow creak. The hatch began to open. Light spilled through, not blinding, not golden, but soft, blue-gray, like dawn filtered through smoke. I looked up, and she looked down, face pale, hair damp, eyes full of something too ancient to name. Not anger, not sorrow, but recognition. And she spoke, her voice so quiet I barely heard it. "You came back." And then she was gone. The hatch closed slowly. The candle went out, but the warmth remained, like something had passed through me, not around me, not above me, but through me. Like a door had opened inside my grief, and something old had walked in uninvited, but welcome. I didn't sleep after that, didn't need to, because for the first time in weeks, the footsteps didn't return. The pacing stopped, the humming faded, the ceiling held still. She was no longer searching, because now she was watching from within. Not all corridors are meant to be walked. Some are stitched shut by time, buried beneath memory, folded into silence. But eventually, even sealed things want to be found. On the 14th night, I stopped pretending the apartment was mine. I stopped closing the curtains, stopped covering the cracks, stopped calling what happened at 3:13 a.m. strange. By now, it was routine, expected, and maybe deserved. Because I had opened too much, answered too often. Grief, once fed, does not shrink, it spreads, like light beneath a locked door. And that night, the door opened wider than ever. It began with the sound, not footsteps this time, but something unfolding, a deep, velvety hiss, like paper being flattened after decades of being pressed tight. Then the air changed. The ceiling no longer felt like a surface, it felt like a reflection, and when I looked up, I didn't see plaster. I saw depth, blue, dusky depth, like the inside of a memory. And hanging above it, like a painting inside a pool, was the corridor, the one I had seen in dreams. This time, it wasn't imagined, it was real, waiting. I climbed the ladder. I don't know how it appeared, whether it grew from the floorboards or descended from the ceiling, but it was there, rust-covered, cold, familiar. Each step groaned beneath my weight, but I didn't stop. I reached the top and stepped into the hallway that had never existed. The floor was soft beneath my feet, like walking on ash. The air was thick with scent, jasmine, mildew, temple incense long since faded. The corridor stretched far in both directions, dim, colorless, each side lined with doors. Old apartment numbers still clung to some, 7A, 7B, 7C, but many had no labels, only deep scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out or in. I walked slowly, no sound, no echoes. Even my breath felt muted. I passed each door in silence, listening. Some whispered, some pulsed, one wept. And at the far end of the hall, barefoot, standing still, was her, the woman in white slippers. Only this time, she wasn't translucent. She wasn't a ghost. She was solid, worn, tired, hair wet with memory. And in her hand, still, was the last letter, not yet delivered. She turned slowly, looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her face clearly. It wasn't my sister, not exactly. It was a version of her, a reflection grown older, a woman who had waited long enough to forget who she was waiting for. But now she remembered, and her voice, when it came, sounded like it had been scraped from the walls. "You didn't leave, you fell." I didn't speak. I didn't understand. She stepped closer, held out the letter. I took it. The paper was warm, still pulsing, like it was just been written. I opened it. One line. "You lived down there, but you belonged up here." Behind her, one of the doors opened, hinges groaning like a tired breath. Light spilled out, cold, flickering, blue. Inside I saw a small room, a single bed, a cracked mirror, a cup of untouched tea, a photograph pinned to the wall, of me, not as I was now, but younger, as though someone had tried to remember me into existence. She turned back to the room and said, "This was yours." I followed her inside, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with something like surrender, because part of me knew this was where the forgotten go, not to die, but to be remembered again. I sat on the bed. She sat across from me. Neither of us spoke, but the corridor outside did. Footsteps, familiar ones, 7 sets, soft, patient. One by one, the doors down the hallway opened, and the forgotten tenants stepped out, not angry, not haunted, just waiting, like people arriving to a long-postponed reunion. They nodded to her, then to me, and walked quietly back into their rooms, letting the doors shut gently behind them. When I awoke, I was back in my apartment. The hatch was gone, so was the ladder, so were the letters. But the photograph on my desk had changed. It was the same photo from the blue room, me, standing in the 7th floor hallway, and just behind me, her, smiling. The ceiling never creaked again, but sometimes, just before dawn, I hear a page turn, a cup clink, a slipper brushing old wood. Not loudly, not mournfully, just enough to remind me. The corridor was never sealed, only forgotten. And now, it remembers me, too. Some rooms are not meant to hold anything. Not furniture, not light, not memory. Only absence. Only the echo of something that almost was. I thought the corridor would vanish after I returned, but it didn't. It stayed, curled behind the ceiling like a second skin stretched above my world. It didn't call to me anymore. It didn't whisper, but it watched. And one night, without sound or invitation, the hatch reappeared. This time, I climbed without fear, without even lighting a candle. I stepped back into the 7th floor, into the hallway of sealed grief. But now, one of the doors was ajar, just barely. Room 7D. I don't remember ever passing it before. It hadn't opened with the others. It hadn't whispered, hadn't wept. It had waited. For me. The door swung open with a sigh. Inside, there was no room, just space, a void, a soft blue abyss. And below me, far below, was my own apartment. I recognized the lamp, the mattress, the candle holder on the floor. I was standing on a threshold above it, as though room 7D was not a room at all, but a hole in memory. And at the center of it, a shape. She stood there, in the void, facing upward, facing me. There was no ladder, no floor, but I stepped inside anyway, and fell, slowly, softly, like a feather lowered through a dream. I landed without sound, no impact, just arrival. And the moment I touched the ground, if it could be called that, she turned. She wasn't wearing slippers anymore. She wasn't holding a letter. Her hands were empty, but her eyes were full, with grief and something else, recognition. She said, "This was the space between us." I asked her what she meant. She stepped closer. "You grieved downward," she said. "I grieved upward. We never met in the middle." We stood there in the room with no floor, no walls, no sky, only memory and silence. And then she lifted her hand and placed it over my chest and whispered, "But you heard me anyway." The room pulsed, not with light, but with knowing. I saw it then, what this place was. Not limbo, not haunting, but a forgotten memory. A space that formed from what was never spoken. The apologies we never say. The grief we never allow ourselves. The rooms we seal when it hurts too much to return. This was where she had stayed. Not because she couldn't move on, but because I couldn't. She had walked the ceiling because I refused to look up. She had written the letters because I never wrote back. She had whispered because I buried her name in silence. And now, finally, we stood in the same room, together. She stepped back. The void shimmered around her, and for the first time she smiled, a real one, the kind she hadn't worn in life. Then, gently, she began to fade. Not disappear, just dissolve, like fog when the sun rises, like grief when it has been given a name. And I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. She knew, and I knew. That was enough. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my apartment. Morning light spilled through the curtains. The hatch was gone. The cracks had sealed. And the ceiling, for the first time in weeks, was completely silent. I walked to the window, pulled the curtains aside. Outside, the building stood quiet, 6 floors tall. Nothing above, nothing below, just space. But I knew better now. There had always been 7 floors, just not for the living. Later that day, I found one final letter, not in the mailbox, not under the door, but on my pillow. Handwritten, neat, steady. You looked up. That's all I ever wanted. By L.
The apartment is quiet now. Still. Oh. The ceiling no longer weeps dust, no longer breathes, no longer hums at 3:13 a.m. She is gone. And yet, something remains. Not her footsteps, not her letters, not her voice, but the space where she used to be. Like an indentation in a pillow long after someone's head has lifted. The shape of presence after absence. I no longer dream of corridors, no longer wake in cold sweat. The hatch has not returned. The crack above my bed is gone. The air doesn't shimmer with memory anymore. But in the early hours just before dawn, my chest still tightens, as though the building remembers too, as though we are both waiting for something that will never quite arrive again. I thought I had been chosen, that she had sought me, but I was just a listener, a mirror, a window left open long enough to let the past return. She would have walked that ceiling with or without me, paced that forgotten floor again and again, whether I heard her or not. The dead do not wait for permission, only recognition. And when they are finally seen, they leave. I moved out on the first day of the next month, packed slowly, box by box. It didn't take long. I hadn't brought much. Most of what I carried were her letters, now blank, all of them, as though the words had served their purpose, then vanished. I left them on the windowsill. Let the sun dry them. Let the wind carry them away. When I locked the door behind me, I stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, listening. One last time, for her. But the silence was complete and kind. The new tenant moved in 3 days later. A woman, maybe 30. She smiled when she passed me in the stairwell, asked if the top floor had good light in the afternoons. I nodded, said nothing else. She didn't need to know. Not yet. That night I stayed in a guest house across the street, one with a narrow balcony overlooking the old building. I told myself I wasn't watching it, just admiring the view. But as the clock neared 3:13 a.m., I found myself standing at the railing, waiting. And then, just for a moment, the light in 6F flickered. The ceiling pressed down ever so slightly, and the new tenant looked up. She tilted her head as if listening, then stood, stepped beneath the light, and I knew it had begun again. Because the footsteps never really end. They only move, like water, from room to room, heart to heart, grief to grief. And when they find someone who listens, someone open, they begin their rhythm once more. 4 steps, a pause. 3 more, a drag. The woman doesn't know yet. She'll hear them soon. She'll check the ceiling, ask the manager, get no answer, try to forget. But by the 3rd night she won't be able to. The footsteps will find her, the seal will break, the silence will bend, and the cycle will continue. I whispered a quiet farewell across the street, not to her, not to the building, but to the sound that still lived in the corners of my thoughts. Step, step, step.
Pause. She's walking again. Not because she's trapped, but because someone else is grieving now. Someone else is listening. And just before I turned away from the balcony, I heard it. So faint it could have been wind, but I knew better. A slipper brushing wood, a breath through plaster, a memory pacing in circles. Footsteps. At 3:13 a.m.